I guess the decision was made. Okay. So what this means in a nutshell is that in order to acquire property by using the kinyan chazaka shelo b'fanav, right? The previous owner needs to say the words lechazek ukni. So let me explain. Ruvain owns a piece of property and he sells it to Shimon, meaning he agrees with Shimon that they are going to make this transaction. But Shimon, in addition to the agreement, needs to actually do an act of kinyan. That's the halacha. He has to do a mode of acquisition. So the halacha is as follows. If the mode of acquisition is kinyan chazaka, something he's doing in the land that signifies that he is the owner, then if it's done in the presence of the previous owner, in Ruvain's presence, then once they agree, he can just do it, and that's the end of it. However, if Ruvain is not going to be present when Shimon does the kinyan, so it's not going to be effective unless Reuven gives him the green light. Unless Reuven says, Lech chazek ukni, go do the chazaka, and with that chazaka, acquire the property. If the previous owner doesn't give him that green light, and he's not present when the property is going to change title, then it's not effective. Question is why? So if you look carefully in the Rambam, I didn't give you Makoros on this because I didn't want to spend so much time on it. But if you look at the Rambam here and there are some small indications that, kinyan chazaka is not the only kinyan that requires some sort of a green light. Maybe Meshicha, maybe Hagba, when you pull an animal or an object into your rishus, maybe there you also, but there it's more, if you look very carefully at the way the Rambam formulates it and the way the Gemaras formulate it, it's more like, well, we need to know that everybody's in agreement. This specific requirement of a green light, shelo b'fanav, when the previous owner is not present, that is something that is singular, seemingly, to kinyan chazaka. And the question is, why? Again, Tosas here is explaining that typically you require that, and in the case where you're breaking up a partnership, since they already agreed upon the disposition of the different parts, so you don't need lechazek ukni anymore. It's almost as if you already said it. When I said, I'll take the east side, you take the west side, it's another way of saying, you have my go-ahead, you have the green light. Okay. But the Rush, as we discussed last week, has a different take. The Rush says the reason you don't need lechazek ukni when you break up a partnership is because when you break up a partnership, you're not acquiring property from scratch. What you're doing is redistributing, the previous owner. It used to be a half owner of the whole, and now you're going to become a whole owner of the half. That's different, or that's what he's arguing. That's different than if you have no relationship. Ruvain owns a property, Shimon has zero connection to it, and now Shimon wants to become the owner. Then you need lechazek ukni, because it's really a change in title. But when it comes to a partnership owned, together by Ruvain and Shimon, and now they're going to split it up. So we don't need, this is the Rosh's explanation, we don't need Ruvain to say to Shimon, on your part, lechazek ukni, because he's not really, he doesn't need Ruvain's green light to own the property. He really needs, simply, each of them need to simply relinquish part of their property to the other fellow, because mibein shneim, they both own the whole property. Whether each owns the whole property, together they own the whole property, these are the different formulations of shutfas. But in the end of the day, each one is, giving up something, not acquiring something. They're also acquiring something. They're acquiring full and exclusive ownership on the half, but they're also giving up half their property. So that's the Rush. So it raises the question, like, what is this like chazek ukni, and why do we require it specifically in kinyan chazaka? And I think the answer goes to something we said last week, and I think if this is true, then it's important. And that is as follows. Kinyan chazaka is different than Meshicha and Hagba, and it's certainly different than Chalipin and Kesef. Chalipin and Kesef are about exchanging value, right? Kesef, money, is exchanging just, value for value. Like you have a ben, you have an animal, you have a watch, and you're paying for it. We understand what that transaction is all about. Sometimes you barter, you exchange, you switch ownership, of two different be'ens, two different objects. My cow for your donkey, right? That's also an exchange. We also understand how that works. It's, object for object. Meshicha and Hagba and Chazaka are more symbolic kinyanim. They're not, exchanges of value. You're doing an action which reflects the new legal reality and therefore helps create that new legal reality. Now, again, you always need, it's never done in a vacuum. It's never done without consent. There always has to be an agreement first. Like if somebody were to do a meshicha, on somebody else's object, that would be meaningless. Or a hagba or a kinyan chazaka, it wouldn't make a difference. If Ruvain owns the property and no agreement has been made to change title with this action, then it's a meaningless action. However, if an agreement was made, but they still haven't formalized it by validating the transaction with a proper maisa kinyan, mode of acquisition, so then you have to go ahead. But here, Meshicha, Hagba'a, Mesira, Kinyan Chazaka, they share something in common in that they're more symbolic than substantive. Right? You're not exchanging the objects or values. As I say, you're doing an action that, highlights, this change. However, here there's an important difference between Meshicha and Hagba on the one hand and Kinyan Chazaka on the other. Meshicha and Hagba symbolize the actual transfer of title, meaning they are physically the new owner takes control. He pulls the object into his domain. He holds the object, in his hand, meaning he controls the object. But Kinyan Chazaka doesn't actually, not an action that itself symbolizes, the change in the title of the object. What it does is it demonstrates who the new owner is. Meaning, the principle behind Kinyan Chazaka, as we discussed last week, is the idea of achzig ba kidemechazki ba inchi. When a person acts like an owner, and as he demonstrates ownership by his conduct and behavior, even though symbolically he's not doing an action which actually transfers the object into his reshus symbolically, but the symbol here is acting like an owner, demonstrative, conduct befitting an owner. And that is very different. And what's important about that difference is that it makes the perception more than the reality important. It's how people who are on the outside, looking in, how they, understand the change that is important. That's why we discussed this last week. The Rambam has a very remarkable shita. Right? The Rambam's view is that you can acquire. Let's look at it for 1 minute. Back to the Marmakomos of last week. Right, Perik Aleph, Hilchos Mechira, Halacha Tezvav and Tezayin, on the bottom of page 7. Ram says, Hoisa Karka Tzchiach Sela. If you had a property that, a real estate, but it was rocky, not fertile soil. She'ein ba lo gader v'lo pirza. Didn't have fences, but it also didn't have breaches. The Eina Bazria, and it's also not the kind of thing that you can, plant in or seed. This is a chiddush of the Rambam. The Rambam says there's still a way you can't plant it, and you can't, whatever. It's not conducive to building a fence or plugging a breach. But what you could still do is you could use it. By using the property, even if it's like, you have animals, so you're gathering together your animals on this property, or, payros, you use the property to display, the fruit, even though that's not a tikkun begufa karka, which is what you're trying to acquire the karka, not the behemos and not the payros. Nonetheless, the Rambam says that's a proper kinyan chazaka, and the Rabbi disagrees. Amar Avram, hamilsa lo mechavra, the chazaka achilas payrosi, the achilas payros lo mahani el keneged taina, aval mikna ba'ara lo kani el midi de mahani la'ara ke'ein na'al begadar. The Rabbi says, listen, the idea, that you're using this property to display your payros or to organize your animals, that would work if we were talking about what's called a rayas chazaka, meaning there's like a conflict between two people, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven's been living in the property, and Reuven says, I bought the property from Shimon. And Shimon says, what are you talking about? I never sold it to you. It's my property. So Reuven says to Shimon, how come you haven't objected, my presence over the last 3 years? That's called cheskas raya. So what does he have to do in that land, to trigger a protest, the silence of which would give him ownership? So one of the examples is, let's say he, uses it to organize his herd of animals, or he displays his fruit there. All that is achzik bakin and mechazki ba'inshi. He's behaving like an owner. Says the Ravid, if the question is a proof, then he's not saying this is a kinyan. He's saying, I bought it from you, I paid you kesef, I made a kinyan chazaka, there was a contract, whatever it was. But now there's a dispute about what really happened, verifying what happened. That's called cheskas gimel shanim. That's a raya. There, payros works for the karka. There, behemos works for the karka. Tashmishim are good enough. But if you need a kinyan chazaka, says the Ravid, then you have to do something constructive on the land itself. No'al, gadar, you have to build a fence, you have to fix something, because you're trying to acquire the land. You're not trying to, just show that you're that's the Ravid's view. What does the Rambam think? The Rambam thinks no. The essence of kinyan chazaka is very close to rayas chazaka. Both of them are about demonstrative conduct that implies you are the owner. You wouldn't do this, you wouldn't act this way. It would be presumptuous. It would trigger a protest if you weren't the owner. That demonstrative conduct is the davar hakona. The Rambam goes so far with this that he basically bases this halacha on a Gemara in Bava Basra, which he himself interprets to be referring both to kinyan chazaka and rayas chazaka. Meaning, there's a Gemara that says that, let's say, the next halacha of the Rambam, if you look on page 8, right, a person sold his property, and the buyer came in and did a chazaka, but this chazaka was beguf originally. The zara, he seeded it. Onara, he plowed it. Sha'asaf peiros ha'ila. Nah, That's trickier. He started gathering the fruit from the trees, ozimro, or he pruned them. If the seller takes a basket, fills it with fruit from the property, and gives it to the lokeach, to the buyer, kana lokeach miyad b'chazaka. So regila daita shehikna l'sadazu kinyan gamor nasu, peiroseha shalo. Meaning, if the owner wants to give symbolically, the new owner, Reuven wants to give Shimon a basket full of fruit to show the changing of the guard, that'll work too. Says the Ravid. No, Amravam calls that holech al derech shekasav. This is the Rambam Lashitaso, but I don't buy it. I don't think it's true. As a raya, in a dispute about whether there was some other kinyan, this is relevant. As a kinyan, right? Since it doesn't address the gufa karka, so it's nothing. So what's the idea of the Rambam? No, if you act like an owner, that is the kinyan chazaka, and that's why the Rambam quotes this Gemara about Osaf Peros Ha'ilo No Zimro, right? Hareze Kana. The Rambam quotes it twice. Once here in Hilchos Mechira, and again in Hilchos Toin V'Nitan when he talks about Rayas Chazaka. I don't recall. I'm sure there must be other examples of this. It's a very rare. I'm sure it can't be the only one. It's a very rare phenomenon, in Rambam, lore, for one Gemara to be quoted and understood as referring to two different institutions and to be quoted in two different places. But the Rambam is totally consistent in this because that's what he thinks Kinyan Chazaka is. He thinks Kinyan Chazaka is not so far from Rayas Chazaka. They're different, but they overlap a lot. It's all about acting like an owner. That's why the Rambam in Hilchos Sechia, that we talked about last time, says that Nichse Ager she'en lo yarshim, v'nichse hefker v'sada shemachar le'akum liYisrael, v'adayin lo hichzik ba, kulam dinam shada, kalamaksik midarke hachazaka, kamo shebar in Hilchos Mechira, kana chutz me'achilas peiros. The Rambam says if you have a sada shel hefker, then you could acquire it with a kinyan chazaka, but not with the kinyan chazaka that he's mechadesh, the one where you gather together, you display your peiros, or you get your animals, and you organize them on the property. That won't work in a sada shel hefker. That'll only work where there's a real owner that you're acquiring from. So all the Mefarshim are mystified. Many of the Mefarshim are mystified. They say, listen, if you continue reading the Rambams in the next halacha, and if somebody were to ask you, instinctively, what is more difficult, to acquire property that has an owner or to acquire property that does not have an owner? What would you say? Is it more say again?
The owner, the one that has an owner.
Is it easier or more difficult?
More difficult.
Of course. Exactly. Logic dictates that, if there's no counter pressure, right, all you need to do is make a kinyan. You don't have to override previous ownership. That should be easier. And that is reflected if you keep reading the Rambam in halacha. Yesh dvarim rabim shemichzik ben melokeach lo kana dayin v'michzik bechad minichse ager or nichse hefker kana. That's exactly what he says. There are methods in kinyan chazaka that work in hefker where there's no ownership to override, but that don't work when you're buying from an owner. So how can it be when it comes to the peiros type kinyan chazaka, the dafka there, we don't say this. I mentioned this before. So the answer is because when it comes to demonstrating ownership, one aspect is actually easier when there is an owner. Because if I want to do something that, establishes me as an owner by otherwise, because otherwise it would be a provocation. I would be instigating, a protest. That's only significant when there's someone to protest. In other words, if I start eating the peiros of the sadeh or displaying peiros there, if the sadeh shel hefker, what does it mean? There's no reason why I can't do whatever I want on that property. That doesn't prove I'm an owner. If I start changing the terrain and doing something constructive, that's a kinyan chazaka. That's an effective kinyan even in the sadeh shel hefker. But if I act like an owner in a way that has nothing to do with the guf hakarka, the only reason that it's considered acting like an owner is because if there was another owner, it would provoke his absolute, strong, reaction. So in sadeh shel hefker, it's meaningless. If this is the case, there's so much you can understand about kinyan chazaka. But now we can understand an approach to lei chazai kukni. What do we ask? Why is it that when it comes to kinyan chazaka, more than other kinyanim, you need to get the green light from the owner, right? If he's not going to physically be present. First of all, why? What does his physical presence have to do with it? Either way, they made an agreement already. Why does he need to say the magic words, lei chazai kukni? And only if he's not present. The answer is very simple, right? In other kinyanim, the kinyan is the symbolic action that you're doing. Mishichas hachefetz, drawing the chefetz in from the outside, holding the chefetz, showing that you control it. It's under your control and sovereignty. However, when it comes to kinyan chazaka, it's about hora'as bailos, demonstrating ownership. So if you do a kinyan chazaka, but the owner isn't around, it's almost like sadeh shel hefker.
Why?
Because you're not provoking a response. He's not there. He doesn't know.
He doesn't know, but he should check it before.
Okay, no, we're not talking about chesed gimel shalim here. So what I'm saying is that's why you need him to say lei chazai kukni. If he's there,
no, that's obgerect, sure.
Then that demonstrates ownership, because otherwise I'm provoking.
Yeah, then we have no problem. Yeah.
I'm
So there's no
his reaction.
So there's no kinyan.
If he says lei chazai kukni, he says yeah, go ahead.
If
then,
is there a kinyan chazaka possible where there's hefker?
Yes, 100%. I'm saying what the Rambam says is to summarize the Rambam in Perek Beis of Hilchos Sechiyah, in some respects it's easier to accomplish kinyan chazaka in hefker, and in some respects it's more difficult. With regard to the chiddush of the Rambam in Hilchos Mechira, it's more difficult because there's no counter pressure. It's not significant. What do you mean I'm acting like an owner? Acting like an owner is meaningless if there's no previous owner. So that's a pshat, I believe, according to many Rishonim, lei chazai kukni as well. Okay. So with that in mind, I wanted to explain one other thing about kinyan chazaka. If you look at the bottom of the page of page 8, is that it?
You mean Daf Ches?
Page 8 in the sheets.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So the last entry on page 8, I think we have the same text, is the Chidushei Ramban Masechet Bava Basra. Everybody have that? Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. This is a very interesting Ramban. Does everybody have it? It helps to look in the text here because it's very... Yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. You're not just humoring me, I hope. Okay. Who knows? Tashlum HaTosefta, the Ramban says. I'm going to assume that people have it. If not, you tell me. The Ramban says, quotes the following Tosefta. No'al echad v'gadar echad. Eina chazaka. Let's say you have a sadishal hefker, meaning you have a field that doesn't belong to anybody. Okay. And you want to acquire it, but not just you. Let's say you have a rival. Reuven and Shimon are rivals. Each one wants to lay claim, acquire, in other words, not lay claim for some past claim, but each one wants to acquire this field that is Hefker. Everybody with me? Oh. So one does No'al, and the other does Godar. Okay. One's closing, the property. That's a form of Chazaka. And the other is Godar, is making a fence. Okay? So the Tosefta says, Eina Chazaka. They cancel each other out. Neither one is going to acquire any part of this property.
But if one is going to Mizrach and one is going to Marav, that we had before in Daf Gimel Amud
Yeah, that was an agreement. That was an agreement. This is a rivalry.
Yeah. Okay.
You're right. It's an interesting contrast. So Noal Echad v'Gadar Echad Einu Chazaka, Noalu Shneim. Let's say they both work on closing something, or Gadru Shneim. They both work on building a wall, in closing. Harezu Chazaka, that works. What does it mean it works? Meaning each one gets 50%, because they're still rivals. They're not working together.
But if the balabos comes,
there's no balabos. It's a sadishal hefker.
I understand, but let's assume that everybody thought that it was hefker because he was in Medina Sayyam.
No, but then it isn't.
No
one can take away property that is owned by an individual.
By somebody.
Meaning, as I always, said in years past, when people say, "Oh, possession is 9/10 of the law," they're not talking about the halacha. If there's no such thing, in other words, if we know that there's a real owner, then squatting and all that doesn't help you. It might establish certain rights that you have, like
if we know, yeah.
Those are things we discussed earlier in the year, right of passage. But the actual title doesn't change hand just because somebody doesn't complain or he neglects to, and so on. Okay. Anyway, listen to this. This is a very interesting Tosefta. So the Ramban, explaining the Tosefta, says, Yesh Omrim, some people explain, the Hachi Perusha, this is the Pshat. The Heicha also betray, I don't know what the base is here, when there are two people, the Kol Chad V'Chad Mechavin Liknos Sada Achas B'Nichse Ager, and each one is interested in acquiring this Hefker property exclusively for himself. Echad Noal, the Echad Gadar, one does one kind of chazaka, tikkun b'karka, the other another. Lo v'chazaka l'chad minayu, neither of them has anything. Why? The itrale chazaz keskase dahai b'shvil heich. Each one undermines the chazaka of the other guy by having competing different chazakos in the same property at the same time. Each one neutralizes the other. V'lo kana echad me'em klum. And therefore, neither one ends up with anything. But if they're both building a fence, each one's building a fence, or they're both closing up or stopping up or locking up the property, even though each one is only interested exclusively in acquiring the full property for himself, since they're both employed, they're both using the same mode, the same tsura of kinyan chazaka. They're both doing noal, they're both doing gadar. Very interesting. Lo mevat lechad minayu lechavri. Neither one cancels the other. The language here is just shocking a little bit. She'ein min mevatalis mino. One, the same quality or the same min, the same type doesn't negate the other. Meaning, since they're both Noals or both Gadars, they don't cancel each other out, as opposed to one being a Noal and the other being a Gadar. They cancel. Min she'eno b'mino is batel. Min b'mino, at least according to Rabbi Yehuda, is not batel.
So do they become shutfim?
In the case of min b'mino,
Yes.
yes. By, not by intent, but that each one ends up being, put it this way, each one owns half. I don't know if they're shutfim, but each one ends up owning half the property.
Well, there's a spiritual meaning to that, because obviously, by virtue of the fact that they've selected without even consulting the same modality, so maybe it's fated, so to speak, that they should own both. I don't know.
That's pretty. I think it's interesting. It's like a brera,
Yeah, right. It's like bread, right. Exactly.
I don't think that's what the Tosefta has in mind. I think it's like an interesting idea that you would come up with that, but I definitely don't think that's what Tosefta means.
So what does it mean though? B'min b'mino.
So I'm going to explain in 1 second, but before we get to that, what's so interesting about this piece is the Ramban is so unhappy with it,
right,
that he just says, if that's the pshat, then the girsa is wrong, and we're flipping it. Listen to this. Yeah. What's each one of them owns half. The kol chad v'chad mesei lechazaka dechaver. Either one is supporting the other one, not unintentionally. Hold the b'chad v'chazaka b'chazki, since they're using the same modality. Says the Ramban, v'im perush habrisa kain. If that's the pshat in the brisa, mishabeshtahi. There's something corrupt about it, meaning it's not accurate. Nein lismoch aleh, and you can't rely on it halachically. Now, let me just interject. The Ramban did not have a different girsa on the Tosefta. The Ramban's saying, if this is the right girsa and this is the right pshat, then there's something wrong with the text, and it's not reliable. He's saying it out of logic, out of conviction. Why? Now he's sugid above Metzia. Gabi rochev umanig. Shekonin afapi she'en kniyason shaveh ve'en mevatlo zu zu. There's a Gemara in Bab Metzia. If one person is rochev on the sus, the other is manig, it's probably kinyan meshicha or something like it. Then each one acquires half. Why don't they cancel each other out? It's min she'ino b'mino. Says the Ramban, obviously there's something wrong with this Tosefta. It's not reliable. Ein mevatlo zu zu. Can't just, complain. So he said, I think the pshat and the Tosefta, the right girsa, must be the opposite. And this is how it should go. Noal echad, the gadar echad, harezu chazaka. Shkol echad asa ma'isa gamor hamoil. If one did a noal, right, he locked the property, and the other one did a gadar, he fenced the property, then they'd split the property because each one at the same time is trying to acquire the whole thing. They don't cancel each other out, but they do have equal claims. Each one's action is registering legally, and they have equal claims. So that means you're going to have to split it. Exactly the opposite of what the original Tosefta seemed to say. However, Noalu Shnayim, V'Gadru Shnayim, here's where he puts a little twist on it also. But let's say they both were involved in locking it up. They both were involved in making a fence. Then it's Eina Chazaka. That doesn't work. Why? B'sheshneim asu gader echad zeh. I'm sorry. B'sheshneim asu gader echad. Sorry. Zeh gadar chetzio. V'zeh chetzio. This is the Chiddush of the Ramban. In order for it to make sense, he says it must be the following. Neither one is doing a full chazaka. Because they're working on the same part, so each one is doing half a chazaka. Okay?
Well, is that work they could split a chazaka?
Well, they're both doing a chazaka. No, that's the whole point. I mean, the Ramban is saying each one's doing half a chazaka. Therefore, each one's doing nothing. That's
Right,
why if they're
okay.
both doing gadar or they're both doing na'al, that's what the Ramban is saying.
Got
So,
it.
kol echad v'yachad asa, I'm sorry. Na'alu shnayim v'gadru shnayim ein a chazaka, v'sheshneim asu gader echad ze gader chetzio v'ze chetzio, v'nimsa shelo hoil ma'isa echad mehem below chavero v'lo kana. Each one requires the other, and they're not working together. Therefore, each one only did it's like a half a malacha, not a half a shear, and nothing happens. That's Ramban. Okay. So is there a way to explain? The Ramban is, we understand his objection, right? Well, just because they're both doing it at the same time in different ways, why does that cancel each other out? But we would prefer, if there was such a tradition in the Tosefta, wouldn't we prefer to make sense of it? For sure. So is there any defense against the rereading or rewriting, actually, of the Ramban? The answer is absolutely, I think, is my suggestion. I haven't seen it elsewhere. What is the Ramban comparing it to? Rochev and Manig. Who says that Kinyan Chazaka works in the same way as Rochev and Manig? The whole idea behind Kinyan Chazaka, at least according to the Rambam, is Hora Spilus. It's behavior or conduct that demonstrates and reflects ownership. Right? That's the whole idea. So now we can understand the Tosefta perfectly. The Tosefta says, listen, if two people are building a fence, they may know they're rivals. But to other people, it looks like they're a team, or they're assisting one another. So even though they're both doing it with the intention of exclusive full ownership, right? In terms of the perception, they don't cancel each other out. Each one's doing, it seems like each one, it sounds like together they're doing a chazaka. And therefore, each one owns half. But if one is doing gadar and the other is doing na'al, that doesn't look like it's two people trying to demonstrate their exclusive ownership at the same time. They don't look like they're helping each other or partnership. It looks like what it is, an all-out contest, on whose demonstrative ownership is going to win. By definition, there's no such thing as a competing demonstrative ownership. The second that it's competing, it's not demonstrative. That's a pshat in the Tosefta, in my opinion.
Right.
Oh, okay.
If each guy, not to diminish that, but just if each guy is playing with a football, they're a team. But if one has a basketball and one has a football, they can't be a team.
Correct. So then they cancel each other out. Not because of min b'mino, min she'eno. I guess maybe it's a good mashal, but what I'm suggesting is this Tosefta is very specific.
Right, to the outside world, the ownership, the demonstration of ownership is obvious. Is when they do the same Noel or Goddard, it's establishable. It's establishable, and then who owns what part is secondary to the idea that there's a king, a chazah.
Right, but for the world, seeing, so the two guys are building a fence. Okay, that's not contradictory. Right. It looks like a partnership, even if it isn't. But as you say, he's playing basketball. He's playing.
But we don't. The outside world.
He's treating it as a football field. He's treating it as a basketball.
The outside world doesn't really care who owns what part. It just wants to know who the new overall owner is, so to speak.
Right.
That it's taken away from Hefker, so to speak.
Correct. Okay, so that is what I wanted to add in all of this. Now I want to move on. We don't have so much time, but let's move on to the next Gemara. Okay. So if you can all turn, I didn't give this sheets wise, but I assume everybody has a Gemara. So let's turn to Dav Gimel Amud Beis. Okay. A Gemara that's very relevant to the, to the situation on the ground. I won't say any more. Okay, you'll see what I mean in a minute. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav, this is on Gimel Amud Beis, at the two dots. I'm not talking about the Ukraine. I'm talking about the Fifth Avenue Synagogue. 4,
Got
8,
it.
12, 16, about 18 or somewhere between 18 and 20 lines down from the top of the page. So the Gemara has a very interesting Shaklavataria. Gemara says, Amar Rav Chizda. Okay.
You mean
So
lo
listen.
listor inish?
Yeah. Lo listor inish beknishta. You're already seeing the relevance, I hope. You're not allowed to dismantle, right, a synagogue. Adebani beknishta achriti. Until you build
Another
a
shul.
replacement. First, you have to build the replacement. Then you can dismantle the old synagogue.
So we were okay because we went to the ballroom.
Oh, we'll see in a minute. We'll see in a minute. You might be okay anyway because the Rush thinks that if you're dismantling the synagogue in order to rebuild it better, that might not be.
But that's not the issue.
No.
No, but this the Gemara, the Rav Chizda talks about mamash destroying the shul, the building, in order to build another shul or whatever.
Right. But are you building? I'm saying we'll see in a minute. The Rush thinks that if you're building in the same place and you need to dismantle in order to expand it or to make it more,
Or to make it safe. It was in such bad shape.
Safe, even better, then you're really in good shape.
We're in good shape. If you knew what was really going on, Rabbi, it wouldn't be a question.
Okay, good. I'm so happy. But either way, these are very relevant Gemaras, as you can see. So Amar Rav Chizda, lo listar inish beknishta, adebani beknishta achriti. In order to dismantle a synagogue, right, you first have to rebuild the replacement. We'll see the parameters soon. Ikada Amri, mishum pshiusa. Some people say the reasoning is because of pshiusa. What is that? Look at Rashi.
They won't be able to rebuild it. Yeah.
Correct. Dilma misrami ones, upashi v'labani achriti. With all the good intentions, right? Maybe some crisis will come up and you won't be able to build the synagogue again. So if you dismantled it already on condition that you're going to rebuild and then something disrupts that, you're going to be left without a synagogue. Chalila, right? The ikad amri mishum tzeluye. Other people say, no, it's not mishum pshiu. So it's not the concern lest it won't be built. The problem is in the interim.
They won't have a place to. They won't have a place to daven.
Yeah, mishum tzeluye. So you could say, the ballroom, right? Okay. My benayu, says the Gemara. Ike benayu di ika. Now there are two girsos here, and this is important for the ballroom issue, right? Ike benayu di ika, according to the girsa in our Gemara, di ika beknishta achriti. Ooh. The nafkamina will be if there's another shul available. So if there's another shul, then there's still pshiusa to worry about. But there's not a problem of mishum tzeluye, which means because of tefillah.
But are you mechuyev to?
1 second. Well, I'm going to show you in Tosas in just a minute that there's another girsa, and that is even if you look at the Masoras Hashas, nusach acher duchte letzluye. What's the difference between Beiknishta Achriti and Duchter Litzluye? Duchter Litzluye means a makom lehitpalel.
Itpalel, sure.
What is Beiknishta Achriti? Beit HaKnesset
Another
Acher.
thing, yeah,
What's the difference?
that you are doing away
Another
with,
shul in the neighborhood, is that what that means?
Well, could be another shul in the neighborhood or on the premises. Meaning, what about a ballroom?
no,
right?
but that's the same building, so it's different.
Okay, maybe. I don't know about the same building. Maybe. Okay, that could be. Meaning, do you need, according to the perspective of Mishum Tzluye, this is an interesting point. We'll see the Rishonim in a couple of minutes and more next week. According to the perspective, do you need another shul or do you need a makom tefillah, b'tzibur?
What's the difference?
So a shul has kedushas beis haknesses.
Mhm.
A shul is a mikdash ma'at.
Sure.
A shul, there are all sorts of, because of that, there are all sorts of rules, regarding a shul. Can you eat there? Can you sleep there? Can you shortcut through it? A kapandarya. Many of these rules have to do with the pattern of mikdash ma'at, of the Beis HaMikdash, right? It partakes of the common denominator, to a real mikdash. So when we say, or for example, when it comes to Kriyas HaMegillah, or when it comes to Neiros Chanukah, we have on both of these issues, we have the the discussion. Neiros Chanukah, there's a minhag, as you know, to light in the Beis HaKnesses in addition to lighting in your home. Very controversial minhag.
Sure.
It's from the Gaonim.
We do that.
What? What'd you say? Oh, I didn't hear. Okay. There's a minhag, it's a minhag of the Gaonim. In most shuls, they do it. They light. The Chacham Tzvi was very opposed to it. He didn't think you should do it. He thought
He
it was
has in his Shilas and Chuvas, he has that.
Yeah. In his Shalos and Chuvas, he comes out very forcefully.
My
And again,
grandfather.
What's that?
My grandfather.
Oh, right, you told me you're from that. Yeah. So he was very strongly opposed to this, especially for Ashkenazim.
Sure.
There's an interesting tshuva of the Rivash, where the Rivash talks about it in terms of, whether about minhagim, and whether you make, a bracha on, on the halal that you say on Rosh Chodesh and on, the other days of Chol Hamoed Pesach. That's a machlokas between Ashkenazim and Sfardim, and in the Shulchan Aruch between the Mechaber and the Ramah. The Rambam says you don't make a bracha on those days, but in the world of Ashkenaz we do. Anyway, so there's a tshuva of the Rivash who says, whether you make a bracha on the Neiros Chanukah, the Beis HaKnesses, is very similar or dependent upon the argument about whether you make a bracha on Hallel, on Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed Pesach. So the Chacham Tzvi has a tshuva in which he says, well, then Ashkenazim should not, then Sfardim rather should not, make a bracha, in of Neiros Chanukah in the Beis HaKnesses. Anyways,
But they don't make a bracha on before Hallel, the bracha before Hallel on Rosh Chodesh.
Right. So because Ein Mevarchen Al Minhag. But anyways, the Gra makes this connection. It's not for now, but the point is it's a very controversial minhag. But let's say most of the world does have the practice to light and to make a bracha on Neiros Chanukah, in shul. What about if you're davening b'tzibur? Let's say, what about some other makom mefursa, makom shel rabbin? This is a very controversial issue also. Right? Rav Soloveitchik was very opposed to Neiros Chanukah in public spaces that weren't a shul. He thought that the minhag was specifically about a shul, not just, the farsei misanes, wherever it is. Like people have, dinners or bar mitzvahs or weddings. It's an interesting question. Like, should you probably the ballroom, if that's your Beis HaKnesses, that's fine. I don't think that's so much an issue. But the issue also comes up in Kriyas HaMegillah. Kriyas HaMegillah, like Neiros Chanukah, there's an aspect of Pirsume Nisa that is very central. So let's say you have a choice. You can read the Megillah in shul, or you can read the Megillah in a place, in Madison Square Gardens, or the Barclays Center, or whatever the race, the UBS, is that the new one? The UBS arena. So, which is better? There's more pirsum where there are more people, right? But it's always better to daven, if you can, in a shul. There's a factor of pirsum and there's a factor of barova madras melach, but there's a different factor of kedushas Beis HaKnesses, and weighing those two things when it comes to various issues. For example, the practice is that even if a person's davening b'yechidus, right, you should try to time his davening
Same time.
Time of the tzibur. The tzibur in the Beis HaKnesses, typically. So it's a very interesting question when the Gemara here says mishum tzeluye, right? Does it mean? And then the Gemara says l'may nafkamina the ika beknishta kriti, and then the other gear says the ika, duchti, achriti litzluye. There seems to be an argument whether to solve the problem of litzluye, it's enough to have a minyan, or you would need to have a minyan in a shul. Further reinforcing what I'm trying to show is a broader discussion. There's a difference between a Beis HaKnesses and just, a random place where you have, Mokom HaTzibur, or even Tefillah for a Tzibur. Because I said, there is a din of Kedushas Beis HaKnesses, the fact that it is built that way, the dinim and so on and so forth. Whether or not that makes it superior or necessary for all dinim is not clear at all. So here you have a little bit of that, discussion. Okay. Either way, let's just get through the Shakavatari because we're going to have to stop in a couple of minutes. But so the Gemara says, "Lo istar in one more time. Lo listar inish beknishta adabani beknishta chriti." Shouldn't dismantle a shul unless you build the alternative first, the replacement first. Sorry. Ika da amri bishum pshiusa. Some people say mishum pshiusa. We're worried that it won't get built. Others say that we're worried about, tefila matahei aleha, in the interim. And then the Gemara says, "My benayu, ika benayu, the ika beknishta achriti." If there's another shul, whether it's probably means in an area in the neighborhood, so another shul or a makom tefila satzibur. That's a debate. Either way, then the Gemara tells the following. Meremar umar zutra, sasri, ubanu, bekaita besitva, ubanu besitva bekaita. So there was like a winter shul and a summer shul. I guess one had air conditioning and one had heat. According to Rashi, the dimensions were, were structured, in terms of the comfort for the weather, differently, depending on the period of the year. That's what Rashi explained. Beis HaKnesses hayelahem limos hachoref, namuch biksalim, right, lower, namuch biksalim rechavim, sorry, right, the chalonos muatin, and there were, the windows were smaller, and there were less windows, mipnei atzina, ubimos hachama, Beis HaKnesses, acher, shavir sholet bo. They had one which was, more conducive to the free flow of the air, because the weather is from the outside obviously is more conducive. So, according to what the Gemara is reporting, what they used to do was when they had to make repairs on the winter shul, they did that in the summer. And when they had to, dismantle the summer shul, they did that in the winter. Okay? So, is that proof for the Manda Amar Mishum Tzluye? That's what the Rosh says. I'll read it in just a second. The Rosh
But
says,
if they have a place for Tzeluye, then they have a place for Tzeluye.
right, but let's say you take the view Mishum Pshiusa,
Okay.
so then it shouldn't work. So that's the view of the Rosh. The Rosh says when the Gemara says that Meremar Marzutri Sasri Ubanu Beikaita Besitva Besitva Bekaita, it's because they were of the opinion that it's Mishum Tzluye. They were worried about Tefillah B'tzibur or Beis HaKnesses for Tefillah B'tzibur, etc. And therefore, since you have this alternative, the summer shul and the winter shul, it's not a problem. However, he then goes on to say that doesn't mean I paskin that way, says the Rosh. I really paskin that it's mishum pshiusa, but these Manda Amram in the Gemara they thought it was mishum tzluya. Well, if we get a chance, I'm not sure if we will. The Balitosis disagree. Balitosis say, listen, they're the ones with the other girsa. Balitosis. They say that the nafkamina mishum tzluye or mishum pshiusa is whether or not ika duchta achrini l'tzluye. But they say if there was another Beis HaKnesses, there wouldn't even be a problem of pshiusa. Everybody with me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what the Balitosis, one day in Tosis says, if you want to look at it, I'll show it to you. I'll take 1 second. We'll go to it. Tosis, what one view in Tosis says is this report about Meremar and Marzutra, the summer shul and the winter shul, is true for everybody, even the Mandamar Pshiusa. If it's Pshiusa, why do we care that there's another shul? That's because they have the other girsa. The girsa that says that the Mandamar says Mishum Tzluye. For them, it's enough to have a makom tefillah that is an alternative, even if it doesn't have kedushas Beis HaKnesses. But if there's an alternative that has kedushas Beis HaKnesses, then even the Mandamar Pshiusa says it's not a problem.
We had it in the time of the pandemic when people davened outside altogether.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, like in tents and other things.
And so even just
Right.
yeah.
Right. So you'll see in a moment, and what Jacob said earlier, is correct. If there's a danger involved, then all of this goes out the window. That's the next line. So the Gemara says, Omar le Ravina le Ravashi. Well, not the next line, but it's coming up. Very interesting Gemara. Okay, we'll analyze it more next week. Ravina said to Ravashi, Gavu Zuze Umachti Mai. Let's say they collected all the money, they did the fundraising, right? The membership came through spectacularly. They have all the money ready for the new shul, right? Gavu Zuzi Umachti. It's all ready. Can they dismantle the shul since they have the money? It's in the bank account. Is that a problem of Pshiusa? So the Gemara says,
why is it about the money? How does that change things? That they could end up not doing it. I don't understand why the money makes a difference.
Wow, that's a voice of experience. Well,
And
it
could be like Lincoln Square. It could cost 40 million. They raised 20. What does that mean?
No, so let's say they raised all the money.
Yeah, but you never know.
Wow, cost overruns.
Yeah.
So the Gemara doesn't say that. They assume that in the olden days a budget was a budget. So I'm not sure about that, whether that was ever true. But listen to what the Gemara says. Amalei Ravina the Ravashi. If they have all the money that they need, might. Says the Gemara, Amalei Dilma Misramilu Pigeon Shvuyim V'Yavule. What they say is something even more remarkable. Let's say there's some Now they say specifically, let's say there's there's a pigeon shvuyim case, somebody needs to be redeemed. So having all the money doesn't guarantee that the job's going to get done, not because of the cost overruns, but
No,
because
because they are spending the money for pidyon shvuyim.
yeah, a crisis. So is it any crisis, any mitzvah, or any crisis, or pidyon shvuyim? We'll have to discuss that. But this is a very interesting. If it's only pidyon shvuyim, it's a very astonishing Gemara. Why? Pidyon shvuyim was so common that we're worried about pidyon shvuyim. What are the odds? Unless
But it's a big mitzvah. I'm saying. I mean, just creating a scenario that could take away the money.
Yeah, exactly. So are we really saying not so much that we're really worried about pidyon shvuyim, but this is a way of highlighting, as long as there's one crisis, right, that would legitimately deny the building of the shul, right, it's still frivolous or a violation of Kedushas Beis HaKnesses, right, to leave it to chance, even if it's a remote chance. That's a very interesting idea. Okay, we'll get back to that. Then the Gemara says, Shrigi livni, Bahudri hudri umachti, kashuri, mai. Let's say they already bought the material. They bought the new Aron Kodesh and all the new wood and all the new chairs and all the new stenders or whatever it is, right? And of course the Ezras Nashim and the whatever it is, everything is ready to go, and they already purchased the material. Is that still a problem of Pshusa? Says the Gemara, Amarle Zimnin Dimisramli Pigeon Shvuyim. Zavni V'yoilahu. Yoivilahu. If there's pigeon shvuyim, they're going to have to sell it. Very remarkable. Most Rishonim of the opinion that even if you would use the money for other mitzvos, only for pigeon shvuyim would you actually sell, the actual material.
Doesn't a mikvah come before a shul also?
Oh, that's a great question. So we're going to discuss, that's what the mikvah, but we'll discuss it. What about a Sefer Torah? What about a shul? What about pidyon shvuyim? Hierarchy in the performance of mitzvahs. We're going to discuss it. Says the Gemara, maybe even once they build the shul, it's no guarantee either. Because they'll dismantle it, they'll sell the building for pidyon shvuyim. Says the Gemara amazingly, the person doesn't have to sell his house for pidyon shvuyim. The Gemara is using the mashal of a house. This is the community's house, right? You don't have to sell your home. If it's already made, if it's already been built, that's not for pidyon shvuyim. Halavai, people should look at the shul as their home, right? The law maran, here's where you get to the sakana part. The law maran, that's if there's no flaw, no crack, no, corrosive beams in the shul. So then you have the luxury of building the other shul and then only dismantling the old one. Look at the way Rashi says. Bikua. Right? Let's say it's really dangerous. Right? There's really a chance that it'll collapse. So then everybody agrees that you can dismantle it. Avachazi batiyua sasri ubani. If it's really a sakana, we'll see what that means exactly. At minimum, it means sakana. It might be more expansive than that. Then you're allowed to dismantle first and only build later. Kehad Ravashi, right? Chazabe tiua biknishta, the Mata Mechasya. So in Mata Mechasya, big city, Babel, he noticed that there was some sort of a flaw in the shul. Sasre, so So he allowed them to demolish it. The ayel lepurye lahasam, right? He brought his bed. The simple shot of the Gemara is he brought his bed to the site of the Beis HaKnesses, and the president of the shul should do this. What do you think? Right? V'lo afke adem mitakin shvichi. He didn't leave. He kept, he slept there, on the construction site until they fixed up the whole shul, including the shvichi. The shvichi are the gutters.
What's the advantage of him sleeping there? What does that accomplish?
He was trying to show the urgency to the congregation that they should get, that they should be supportive of the campaign, and that they shouldn't delay. Let's think he's going to sleep there until we get this done.
It wouldn't work. Okay.
Are you sure? I think it would work. Okay.
But if you're not allowed to sleep in a shul, then
that's
how does it work?
Very good. Excellent. So that's why I kind of protected myself by saying that the simple reading of the Gemara is that he went to the actual shul site and he was sleeping there. But that's, if you look at Tosas for a minute, Tosas says, the Aile, we'll discuss all this. The Aile Lepurye Lahasam. Tosas says, V'tema, V'amrus Bate Knesios, Ein Yeshenim Bahem. Lo Shenos Kena.
Oh, I didn't know.
That's all right. What?
No, it's okay.
That's exactly your question.
Exactly
Exactly your question. You're not allowed to sleep there. How could he sleep there? Maybe that's only in Eretz Yisrael, but not in Bavel. They made the Bate Knesios al Tanai on condition that if you needed to. Gomer Vasi Park Basu de Megillah, Bate Knesios shel Bavel al Tanai Heina Suyos. Upirush HaKuntras, Rashi explains, Hasam nafkamina, le'inin hadik tani le'el, ein ochlin, b'hen ve'in shosim b'hen ve'in nichnasim b'hen b'chama b'nei achama b'gshamim b'nei agshamim, right? Ub'shel bavel mutar. This idea that you can't treat a shul, like, oh, it's raining, I'll go into the shul. If it's, I'm hungry, I can eat in the shul, The Bate Knesios of Bavel, they sometimes made it Tanai, not to give it that level of Kedushas Beis HaKnesses. Kamar Hasam Basar Hakim, but later in the Gemara there it says, Ravina v'Ravada Havakaimi, the Shaili Shmaita mi Rava, Oza Zilcha Dimatra Alayu, Va'ayla Lebe Knishta, V'lo Mishum Mitra, El Mishum de Shmaitza Boit Salusa. There, the Gemara has a whole different excuse. That they let it was raining and they let him come to the Beis HaKnesses to give the shiur because people couldn't concentrate, but not because it's Bavel and doesn't have that level of Kedushas Beis HaKnesses. So in the end, Tosa says, Beis HaKnesses shall Bavel hayu v'yuchalim likanes b'pnei amatar for the rain. They show me the lav mamish the Beis HaKnesses ayu lepuria. They said, yeah, he didn't really bring his bed in the middle of the Mizrach, or right up the Bima there. Ella b'samach lebeis haknesses b'makom she'orchen regilan lishan sham b'lechal. It used to be that the people passing through the community, guests, used to stay and sleep in the Beis HaKnesses. That's why we have the minhag of making kiddush in shul. For the orchim, for the people who are going to eat in the shul. Right?
That's why we make.
Actually,
okay.
Yeah, go ahead. What are you going to say?
I thought it's for people that have nowhere to go Friday night that they're Yotze Kiddush.
Yeah, but some of them also used to be a place and they used to sleep in the shul. So the Fifth Avenue Synagogue with its weekly post davening kiddush during the day is in a very good tradition.
Weekly post. You talking about the breakfast? What are you talking about, Rabbi?
Don't you on Shabbos you have a kiddush after davening?
Oh, Shabbos day, not Friday night. Friday.
No,
Shabbos
but it's
day.
the same meaning. It used
Friday
to be
night
that,
we have before, right?
What do you have Friday night?
We have just a little shear before davening. think Rabbi Willig was involved. Whatever, like people come and learn, eat a little bit
Oh,
before.
okay, that's something else. No, I'm just trying to point out that what you see from these Gemaras that Orchim used to stay in the shul, and they used to eat in the shul on Shabbos and during the week.
Interesting.
Ushmul Lamalei, this is the same. Lamalei Kedusha Bebe Knishta. The Gemara says in Arvei Psachim, like, why did they make Kiddush in the Beis HaKnesses? Lafuke Orchim Yidei Chavasim Da'achlu V'shasu V'ganu Bebe Knishta, because they used to eat and drink and sleep in the Beis HaKnesses. Okay. Had Amar, what does it mean then? We say Al Tnai Hein Asuyin. The Farishli Le'inun She'im, right? Yechrevu Yasa Mehen Mashi Yirtzu Levad Mikal Asrosh Krim Yasa. The Tnai of Bavel, he disagrees with Rashi. Rashi says the Tnai of Bavel is even when the shuls were standing, you could eat there, you could drink there, you could sleep there in Bavel. And the Balitosa say, no, it doesn't mean that. It means that if the shul is dismantled or it's not used anymore, under those conditions, right, you could expand your use of it. Okay, we're going to stop here because it's late. What we've seen in this Gemara is a very interesting question, and what we need to analyze it better. Either mishum pshiusa or mishum tziluye, right? You should be very careful, right, about shutting down an existing Beis HaKnesses. There are exceptions.
Yes.
There are exceptions. Certainly sakana. We'll see next week that the Rosh things that to build it back better is also in the category of tiyua, even if it isn't a sakana. But if you're widening it and building it, the only way to do that, it's like Sosra Manas Livnos, he thinks that's not a problem. If there's another place to daven, or if there's another shul, that mitigates the problem. But what we want to try to figure out a little bit is like, what's the big deal? Like, why are we so worried, especially if there are multiple, if there's a place to daven, and especially another Beis HaKnesses, why, according to those shitas that we are, and that's quite a few, why are we so worried, that the number of Batei Knesios in the community should not go down? As long as everybody has a place to daven, what do we care?
That's an interesting conversation. Like, what's wrong with
Next
merging
week.
shuls?
What?
Okay. Like, what's wrong with merging shuls? According to that, you shouldn't merge a shul. Like, it's better to have 3 shuls than 2 shuls.
Right. That's an interesting question. We'll talk about it.
Okay,
Obviously, there's a
looking forward.
difference between like merging, existing shuls and destroying,
Oh, I see.
But
Okay.
I think it's an interesting point. Is there some Indian of having like,
More shuls? Okay.
per se? Obviously, if they're sustainable and supportable, otherwise you're just causing problems. But you need a strong community. A strong community needs to know what it can support. But
Right.
there are interesting issues that come up here, as well as like the hierarchy, like why Pidyon Shvuyim? Is it only Pidyon Shvuyim?
One at mikvah or other stuff.
Right. So we'll talk about that.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rabbi. Great share. Thank you. Good night.
Okay, good week,
Good night.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.